Hey everyone, thanks for joining up. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Chris Hansen with eOne Solutions. I'm our SmartConnect product manager here at eOne. And on the line with me, we also have Drew Nelson, who is an advisor sales executive over at Concur. And what we're going to be going through today is our introduction to Concur and Microsoft Dynamics integration using SmartConnect. Since we've got Drew on the line, we're going to spend about the first half of the session where he's going to walk through the different features and functionality that exists within Concur. And then the second half, I'm going to go ahead and take over the presentation and talk about the different integration options that we have available to us once we've collected all that data. So again, starting with our Concur overview, he's going to go through invoice, expense, and travel. His demonstration is going to be on Concur expense and actually showing a part of that in action. And then we're going to talk about SmartConnect and the different methods and integration points that we have with Concur when you want to be sending that data either to or from Dynamics GP, NAV, or Business Central. At the end of the session, we'll have a dedicated question and answer time. With that being said, if you guys have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and chat them through to the webinar itself. We've got a handful of people in the background here that should be able to go ahead and answer anything that comes up while we're presenting. Additionally, we're going to be recording this session, so we're going to be able to go ahead and send this out to anyone that's attended or missed the session after we're done with it. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to Drew, and he's going to walk us through the best practices that you can go ahead and use with Concur.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great. I just handed you the presenter role, so you should be able to go ahead and...
All right, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. We're excited about this and couldn't be more excited about our partnership with eOne. We've had a lot of success as far as working with them and introducing SmartConnect to our clients. So excited to show you a little bit of Concur and how that integration works. So we'll talk about overall spend management best practices with Concur. So how we do that and what that looks like for our clients using Concur solution. So if you look at the typical spending breakdown within a lot of organizations, we find that 35% of their total company spend is in the payroll and benefits. With many organizations have outsourced this to a payroll vendor like an ADP or Paychex. But where Concur comes into play is that other 65% of total spend that an organization has, with 10% of that falling typically in travel and entertainment. And the other 55% of that in accounts payable. So how they're managing their vendor bills, where most organizations haven't addressed that or looked at automating that part of the organization. That's where we can really come into play and offer some value and optimization. When we look at our current customers, it really comes down to three different reasons why we found that they've automated what they're doing. The first of those is around process. So they feel really administrative burden. They can't get to other processes. They're really buried in paper, where they're using spreadsheets today and employees are stapling receipts, to those spreadsheets and turning them in, or literally actually boxes of receipts and paper invoices. I find that that's very, very manual today. It typically, is a slow process. It's not extremely efficient. They may have late payments or find that the spreadsheets are error prone. They don't have a good workflow for approval. So really that would be around the process. So thinking about, cost avoidance, how do we fix our current solutions without really bringing on more headcount and adding to the organizations, looking at technology to solve the process challenges they have. Number two, being control. So we're finding that spending is out of control. They don't have a good way to enforce policy. I talk to a lot of organizations that say they are able to see the spend violations on the back end after employees have spent money on the corporate card, but it's really hard to fix it at that point, right? So what they're looking for is, how do we control spend before it happens? Instead of slapping wrists on the back end. So this is looking at getting policies in place. Fixing some of that error prone. So there's expense reports, not that typically people are trying to be malicious, but there is a portion of that can be padded. So where Concur comes into play is being able to put in some of that policy around how we're doing things in the organizations today to put controls on that. So how do we really focus on profit margin and make it an impact to take control of that? And the third challenge being visibility. So how do we allow organizations to have a clear look at cash flow all throughout? So I talk to a lot of organizations, especially on the invoice side, where they find that they don't have visibility to that invoice until the due date when they're actually cutting the check. But they talk about how much of an impact it would be on the organization to be able to see that invoice day one when it shows up. So they can see it as a liability very early in the life cycle and be able to plan how to use their cash around that to give a better cash flow position to the organization. There's a big opportunity for vendor discounts here, identifying spend violators, giving reporting to the business at a high level, be able to see overall where we're spending, how to negotiate discounts with our vendors, et cetera. So this is what's going to give us a competitive edge over others in the market. So looking at that, Concur helps do all of that by providing an integrated solution. So we offer not just the policy and expense reporting, but we offer travel booking, all of your expense automation, as well as the invoice and AP. So Concur was really built on the premise that there has to be a better way. So you think about how you used to do banking, right? Where we went to the bank and actually stood in line to be able to deposit a check and get cash and move money around. Where today, that's almost all that you can now do on your phone, right? So I pull up my Wells Fargo app and deposit checks and transfer money and do everything I really need to do without ever going to the bank. Well, Concur's really set up the same way. So think of the old business processes of receipts and spreadsheets. We're able to do that now completely mobile. So what we offer is a solution that it's a total cloud solution. So it's accessible via PC, tablet, phone. Oftentimes I'm sitting on the airplane and the guy next to me is doing his expense report right on his phone before the plane takes off for his business trip of that week. As it's really written itself, and he's just checking to make sure and validate that things are being right cost codes have been selected. So starting with the travel piece of that, so I'll do travel, invoice, and then I'll end with expense. But on the travel side, really there's options, right? So where most organizations are today is do nothing. So where a lot of them are booking travel on consumer sites, getting the typical consumer rates. There's little to no visibility. There's really not much from a control perspective here, right? We're not able to guide or police employees on how they're booking, nor are we able to negotiate discounts as we have no visibility on how and where we're spending with those certain vendors, and not a lot of integration into expense tools, the way that's set up today. So on the complete opposite end of the spectrum is a completely managed travel program. So working with a travel management company here, you think of Concur as the iPhone and the travel management company as the Verizon or the Sprint. So we still work with the travel management company to actually fulfill the tickets, but you'd be using the Concur engine to be able to do all of your travel booking in one place. So this gets you an integrated solution into your expense, gives us that ability to build out policy on the front end. So as I talked about, being able to offer that on the front and police it without slapping wrists on the back end. But let's point people to the best travel options we have in an organization and put some policy around that. We could have workflow approvals around how people book travel and get approval before they book it. We can look at duty of care. A lot of options here as far as how we structure and build travel, and can really shape the way our organization does that. In the middle of there, we also have another option. So for organizations that aren't looking to have a fully managed travel program, but would like to get some of the discounts that are offered in there, we have a new offering called Hipmonk that offers consolidated buying power. So it gives you the power of many opportunity here. So what we've done is pooled together a lot of our small to mid-sized businesses and negotiated rates on their behalf. So through Hipmonk, you're able to get the rates that a large 500 company may get while being a smaller company. while also integrating this into expense. Very minimal administration. You wouldn't have the policy around this, but provides a great option for companies that are looking to save money in how they're booking travel and provide an easy way to do that. So jumping from travel booking into the AP invoice processing, so what we do in invoice is really automate every piece of that puzzle. And it doesn't have to be a full end-to-end solution where we have clients that piece and pick and choose how they do this today. So they may continue to do POs the way they're doing it, or they may continue to pay invoices the way they're doing it today. But we have an option that provides an end-to-end. So everything from cutting of a PO to capturing that invoice. So we can even 100% manage the capture of that, where paper invoices can come to our facility in Minnesota where we'll open the mail for you. We'll scan them into Concur and we'll validate to ensure that the optical character recognition is 100% complete. We'll then route that invoice for approval following your approval workflow within the organization, catch any thresholds you may have. So if it's a certain vendor that goes through these department heads for approval, or it's any invoice over $10,000, we want the CFO to have its eyes on them. We can build all of those rules into Concur and then bring that into payment. So we can also then pay on your behalf as well, whether that's via check, ACH, virtual payment, credit card options as well, and then integration. So as Chris will jump in, is then how do we get that information back into our financial system to match up to the GL. But overall, giving you total spend visibility all throughout that process. So a quick look at how that optical character recognition technology works. So when either it's managed by us or it's managed by you, you'd have the access to scan in an invoice, and we're going to automatically pull every piece of that invoice off of it and bring it into Concur, really eliminating, eliminating paper, and two, eliminating any of that manual input you may currently be doing. So grabbing the vendor information and address off of the invoice, grabbing the invoice number, the date, if there's a PO that's applicable, the total invoice amount, grabbing each of those line items and breaking those out as separate expense types within Concur, and doing our best to automatically code them to the cost objects based on history that we've had in doing that with that vendor and with those types of line items. Also matching up to who's in charge of this and what approval workflow that takes on within the organization. And then that approval can be done mobilely as well. So it can be done on the desktop site, as I'll show you here in a moment, or it can be done mobile too. So as that invoice hits your dashboard, you'll get an automated message notification on your phone or via email saying you have an invoice or an expense report available for approval, and be able to see that invoice on your phone and be able to approve that mobilely. Really cutting out those bottlenecks within an organization when it comes to invoice approvals. And then from approval, then how we pay, as I mentioned, we can cover check, ACH, corporate and virtual card payments, which a lot of times we can find some rebates and incentives to give back and really prove the ROI of Concur as well. ACH for free, and then checks. We can cut checks for an organization at $1 per check, and that's postage on their check stock out the door, which is, again, another very hard saving ROI to an organization, as we find that most are spending anywhere between $3 to $7 per check when they account for ink and check stock, postage, and time spent of someone actually signing those. We're able to automate that entire process for organization, providing a big win in ROI. So as a quick recap of that, we get expedited processing. It gives you visibility all the way across the life cycle of an invoice, and then optimizing the payment, giving you total cash flow optimization. So as I move from invoice into expense, I'll cover first the front end. So how do we start to automatically create an expense report for you? It starts with the one on the receipt side, being able to capture those receipts mobilely. So with Expense-It within the Concur app, you simply snap a photo of those receipts while you're out on the road. We're going to again use that optical character recognition technology to grab all the relevant information off there, the date, the vendor, the location, the amount, and build that expense report for you, sending that all directly into Concur. So once that's been done, I'll now jump into live, show you a quick demo on the expense side. So here's my home screen of Concur. So I'll have everything turned on in here today. So I have, you'll see my travel booking, my expense reporting, and my invoice all in one location. So as I log into here, all my spend management and travel booking all in one spot and easily accessible. So I'm going to focus on the expense side of it today. So I'm going to go in here and see any of those available expenses that are here that have been started to write my expense report for me. They've come in a number of different sources. So I mentioned just a moment ago about how I've grabbed that receipt using Expenseit. Here's an example of that. So I can see this source here, this one being at the Home Depot. So I took a photo using Expenseit. It pulled the vendor, the location, the date, amount, and automatically categorized it as office supplies, being that it was at Home Depot, and assumed that. I'll have in a moment here be able to change that from a drop down and show you that. Office warehouse, this being one that came in via credit card transactions. This is one where we've synced our Amex to directly come into Concur. If I then needed a receipt on this transaction, I could have either grab that from using Expenseit, and Concur would have automatically matched the two of them together, or I could forward a receipt or upload it as I'm processing my expense report as well. Here's an example. I also will automatically match itinerary. So here's one that I had booked within Concur, and then it's going to match my corporate card transaction that I used to pay for that United Airlines flight. And down here, hotel, it's a great example of a e-receipt. So if I don't know how many of you have ever manually typed in all the line items that show up on a hotel folio at the end of a trip, well, Concur is going to automatically itemize and line item every one of those expenses out automatically. So this wasn't a picture or a receipt I had to take a picture of. This is one that got automatically brought into Concur because we work with 100% of airlines to capture e-receipts, 100% of the car rental, and roughly 95% of hotels out there to automatically bring in those e-receipts directly into Concur for processing. So I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to move those to a new report and show you how I do some of that allocation. So let's call this my June report. I could collect any of this information or turn these on as required fields based on how we want to capture and collect data. I could have this whole report go to a specific client or project as well. I'll show you how we'll do that on a transaction level here in a second. So as it's going to go through my transaction, it's going to apply any of the policies we may have against those and flag those for both me to see as exceptions, and then as it carries on, we'll let my manager see any of those exceptions or policy violations that I've flagged on my expense report. So as it goes and continues to apply those policies, we'll have those available in just a moment for doing allocations, adding users to any of those expenses, business meals. It's going to capture those receipts, and then we're going to hold on to this information for the IRS minimum of 7 years as well. I've actually Concur never purged our data, so we have receipts going back 23 years for some of those employees or companies that have been Concur customers. So for some reason my internet is lagging today, so bear with us here just a moment. Let's try that one more time. Continue. Of course, it's when we're presenting that the demo site is that it has its issues, right? Apologize for this. This actually never happened here before.
Looks like your second report has some expenses added to it.
Yeah, let me try this. So sorry about that. We'll use this as an example. So here, as I've mentioned, is where we're going to show those exceptions that were flagged on this report. So I'm going to show those as the red exceptions. So this one being an example is a business meal, right? That I've categorized as a business meal, but it's saying that I don't have any attendees other than myself. So this is a place where I can go quickly add new attendees to this. I can choose them from a drop downs of a number of different lists of attendees that I've loaded into Concur as well, whether those be employees or business guests that I've loaded from the CRM or financial system. But I can quickly add attendees or add them from an Outlook integration as well. I'll go ahead and add John, use that and save that to my report, as well as adding the business purpose, because I've required that on all my business meals as well. So as I save that, it'll then clear that exception from my report. So in here is where I can see as well any of those receipts that I have sitting on them, and any of the corporate card transaction as well. So it's where Concur has gone in and automatically identified each of those. And any of these, if I find that the expense type wasn't categorized appropriately, it's quickly selecting from the dropdown of any of those expense types that we've then set up in Concur during your activation of those expense types that are going to match the GL or chart of accounts within your organization. I'm also allocating those to specific departments or clients or projects. I can do that very easily and even break them out by any number of organizations. So if I had a flight where I was going out and happened to visit 4 clients on this specific business trip, well, I'm going to allocate that airfare across all 4 of them and select those clients, projects, or departments from quick drop-downs. So and these can be linked lists as well. So if I select client 1, it can show me those projects that are applicable in any of those departments that are applicable as well. And you'll see the GL code load on the back end, and I can easily save that. And then when then as Chris shows, when we'll integrate that back into your financial system, where that will then flow back to your chart of accounts. So one of the other ones we commonly see, that I'll show you quickly, is on the mileage side. So we find that a lot of organizations are reimbursing for mileage. We have a couple of different ways to do that. One, we can do it via the mobile app and using a GPS. So they can, as they're starting their drive, click start, and it's going to capture all of those mileage and put them directly on the expense report. Say I forgot to do that, I simply can come into Concur, and we've integrated Google Maps in here. So say I'm going to go from our head office in Minneapolis to our Eden Prairie office. Let's calculate that route. Let's make that a round trip, because I went there and back. Add that mileage to my expense report. So I can view we're using the IRS standard reimbursement rate, or we can have a custom rate for the organization as well. And I simply save that, and it's going to save that map and those miles directly to my expense report. So then when I'm all done and have cleared the exceptions, I simply submit this report. It'll then go following my workflow approval for me as a user. So mine is set up to go to my manager, and then once my manager approves, to pass along to the AP specialist, which then it will get badged for for integration. So from there, I'm going to hand it back over to Chris and talk about where that goes after I'm done with it in Concur.
All right, thanks, Drew. Let me go back to sharing my screen again. And yeah, we'll pick it up where Drew's left it off. He showed the ability to track any of your invoices, track your expenses as you're accumulating them, and throw them all into a report that needs to be approved by one of your manager or managers. Once that data has been approved, that expense report has went through and been approved, it's now sitting in a batch inside of Concur. And at that point, that data needs to make it to your Dynamics or your financial system at some point, hopefully a Dynamics ERP. So when you're looking at all that information that's been collected, the first question that always comes up when I talk to a customer about Concur is why they should integrate or why they should try to automate that process. And there's kind of three main reasons. The first is removing the duplicate data entry, which should be obvious to anyone on why that's important. There's less chance of errors, which is point two. If you have people touching that data less, if they're not hand keying it in again, it's a much better result that you're going to get at the end of the day because there's less chance for human error. It also saves a lot of time. With removing that duplicate data entry, obviously somebody else can actually be doing something that they should be instead and actually, doing useful work. So the third point of improving efficiency kind of wraps up the other two. And I know it's fairly vague, but all those little steps, if the integration between Concur and your financial system isn't automated, that adds up a lot of time over the course of months and years. It might be only an hour here, an hour there, but suddenly after a month or two, you've spent a couple days doing a process that should be automated in the first place. So with that, we're going to look at the common integration points that we get requests of from Concur. And the two that are the most common by far are you're either doing a payables invoice or you're doing a journal entry. And the direction for this data is always going to be from Concur over to your Dynamics product, to GP or NAV or Business Central. So what those entail is when you're pulling out that data, once your expense reports have been approved, they go into a batch, and once that batch has been closed and finalized, at that point, Concur allows that data to be picked up to be integrated. And that's when it's going to be your payables invoice. If you're doing, Concur invoice, might be directly to the general ledger if you're doing expenses. But it's at that point that we're going to be creating those integrations flowing down to your financial system. And I'm going to be showing two examples of these, one of a payables invoice, one of a journal entry here in my demo in just a couple minutes. In addition to those two integration points, there's another set of data that gets requested to be integrated. It's not as common as the first two, but we do get requests around vendors and then around purchase orders and PO receipts. And for the most part, the request we get on this is that people want to send that data back up to Concur. So with vendors, a lot of times you're going to want your financial system to be the master, the system of record for your vendors. So it makes sense to be sending the vendors back out to Concur rather than having people create vendors on the fly in that system so they can go ahead and receive their invoices for them. For purchase orders and receipts, I've got that for the arrow going from your Dynamics system to Concur. This one could actually be bi-directional. If you want to do three-way matching in Concur, you can go ahead and send up those receipts as needed from your Dynamics system. Or if you're receiving the quantity to receive, if you need to update a line item on your PO or on your invoice, you can be sending that back down to Dynamics if needed. So again, just for this side, the most common requests we get are going to be your payables invoice and your journal entry. The other two happen in maybe 1 out of every 10 requests that we get that come in. So talking about the common integration points, the next step that we have to look at is how we actually get to that data and how we access that information. So Concur's got three main methods of allowing us to communicate with the Concur system to either pull data out or push it back into Concur. So the first one, and the one that's built into anybody that happens to have Concur expense or Concur invoice, is a manual extract. So we've talked about getting the expense reports, waiting for approval. Once they've been approved, they go into that batch. Once the batch is closed is when you're able to go ahead and get this extract file. When it pops up by default when you go through that batching process, it allows you to download the file that you need. So we'll open up one of these files when I get into my system. But the data that exists within that file is everything that you should need to create your journal entry or your payables invoice based on the type of transaction you want to build inside of Dynamics. So all of your information around like your department, your expense type, your project, your client, you can go ahead and put your account codes, your account segments on each of those different fields if needed within Concur. And when the expenses come through, they're included in this file that gets extracted. So you're able to make sure you're hitting the correct accounts inside of your financial system. So this manual extract is the first route. If somebody wants to manually grab that file from that system, they can download that at any time once the batch has been closed out and no more edits or modifications can be made to it. Taking that a step further, Concur has an offering where they can go ahead and provide an FTP server and actually automate the process of generating those files. So again, what this is going to do is it's looking at that same process. It's looking for the closing of a batch. Once that batch is closed, it will be set on a schedule to go ahead and pull across that new extract file whenever it's been completed. So in that sense, you're no longer having to manually download the file from Concur. It's going to be the same data. It just automates part of that process and sets it out to an FTP server where we can go ahead and access that from SmartConnect. In addition to that, this FTP server also is the first step where Concur allows data to be sent back into Concur. So if you want to send vendor information up or some PO receipt information across and back to Concur, they've got file layouts that we can follow and we can use as the file destination within SmartConnect to generate the files in the needed layout, and we could drop them on that server, and Concur will go ahead and consume those, again, on a scheduled basis to pull that data back into their system. So the third option beyond this is actually using the Concur web service. So they have an API that they've developed that sits on top of their entire product that allows us to go ahead and call into the API to get the data we need. If we're looking for the data that is both for the general ledger or the payables invoice, that data that comes out in the extract file that you can manually generate, when we're calling that through the web service, it generates the same file for us. It's just doing it through the web service, so it's on demand. So the good news is that if you're looking to integrate into your general ledger, if you're looking to integrate into your payables invoices, it doesn't matter which of these three options we use, as at the end of the day, you're getting the same extract file, that same data dumped out to you to be picked up by SmartConnect. It's just a preference on how you want to call that. Do you want it to be a manual process? Do you want it to be scheduled? Do you want it to be on demand? Once you get to configuring the mappings and the integration, we're working with that same file layout each time. In addition, and the last point on here is with web service, instead of dropping data onto that FTP server, if you want to re-upload it, we can call into that web service directly to go ahead and create the needed vendor records or to go ahead and send the PO receipts back up to Concur. So I've talked a lot about the integration points and the data that we integrate. For anybody that's on the call that hasn't heard of our integration tool before called SmartConnect, this is the graphic we normally go with when we're doing a general overview. It's a fairly good layout of what SmartConnect encompasses. So walking through this, the first part we want to take a look at is the very top grid on there, the data source section. So at the start of our project or at the start of the integration, you have to determine where your data is coming from. So this could be from a text file, it could be from a SQL server, it could be from a web service or one of our other dedicated connectors. But this is just determining where we're pulling that data in from. Once we have that, if you skip all the way to the bottom of this graphic and we look at the destination, this is where SmartConnect is able to send the data to that we've pulled in. We've got dedicated connectors around Dynamics GP, Dynamics NAV, Dynamics 365 Business Central, 365 Sales or CRM for the CRM side along with Salesforce. And any of those destinations that we've got configured or connectors for, we can set up with any data source you happen to select. So for this call specifically, we're looking at going from Concur and from that extract info that we can acquire, and we're going to be sending it into one of either GP, NAV, or Business Central. But the options are there if we need to go ahead and integrate to any of the other systems as well. Now, where most of the work gets done and where SmartConnect adds the majority of its value is in those middle two bars here, the triggers and the transform section. So this is telling us this allows you to set when you want the integrations to run, how you want them to run, any additional features and alerts or error tracking you want on the maps can all be set up within this section. So first off, we're determining when it should run. We've got the ability to do real-time integrations. We can do a scheduled process to track changes on data, or we could leave it manual if somebody wants to review data before they upload it to their destination. On the transformation side, we're able to go ahead and manipulate that data as it's being passed through SmartConnect. There's very few scenarios where your data source matches up perfectly with your destination. You're almost always going to have to transform that data in some manner, and that's what the transformation option allows us to do. We can do scripting in there, we can do translation tables, we can go ahead and calculate dates based off our data that's coming in, and we can grab the next transaction number as needed when we're sending data into the financial systems. So this section allows us to go ahead and take whatever data we receive from our source system and convert it as needed when we're passing it through to our destination. With all that being said, let's go ahead and I'm going to walk through a demonstration of sending data to two different systems. The first one, we're going to do Concur to Dynamics GP. And we're actually basing this off of us internally. The extract file that I'm using, or the extracted data that I'm using, is coming from our own internal implementation of Concur. So we use Concur expense, and we track all that information that's being spent on our corporate cards, and we need to get it directly into our general ledger. So that first option is going to be showing data flowing into the Dynamics GP journal entries. The second option is going to be running into Dynamics NAV. Now, I mentioned that we support Dynamics GP, NAV, and Business Central. There's no difference to SmartConnect between Dynamics NAV and Dynamics 365 Business Central. So anything I talk about on the NAV side also applies to the Business Central solution. In that case, I've taken a client's extracted data that we've used before. Obviously, I've changed around the data, so nothing is recognizable. But they were using Concur invoice, and they wanted to go ahead and create the needed payables invoices based off that data. So we're going to be showing a payables invoice flowing into Dynamics NAV based on that. So let me go ahead and full screen my demo system. And the first thing I want to start with is showing you guys an example of what this extracted information may look like. So I'm going to go ahead and take our US bank export file that we've got here and just scroll through a few fields on this. Now, when I open it up, this looks really ugly. It's just that dump CSV file that we happen to have here. But this has all the needed information in it for us to create the transaction we want inside of GP or inside of NAV. Now, we're using the standard export at the moment with our Concur expense implementation. You can actually customize that export that's coming out. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second here when I get to a few more interesting columns on this. So you can see all of our expenses are coming across from different expense reports. There's my expense report. I've got a few things I've been racking up. We've got expenses from all our other employees. But if I keep going along here, you can see if we put notes on any of these, what we're actually doing. This might have been my very first expense I sent through, is our Concur testing one. Purchased something off our own site. But if we continue on, we can go ahead and see what the expense is being tracked for. We can see the employee that's submitted it, and then we can actually get to the journal amount, the journal account code, and whether it's a debit or credit. So based on this, we should have enough information to go ahead and pull this data into our journal entries. Now, since we're using the standard one for our Concur export, that doesn't contain our entire account code. Part of it is actually broken out over here on our department. That's actually our first segment, and this journal account code is only our second segment that happens to be in here. If you customize the extract file that's coming out from Concur, you can combine the needed columns that you have so that your account number shows up inside of one column. If you don't do that, if you use the standard export like we're doing, either through the web service or FTP or directly downloading it, in that case, we have to handle this inside of SmartConnect. And we create a calculated field and we combine the needed columns to generate our account code for us. Now, one question I get asked a lot is this data standard? Can we go ahead and build templates off of this information? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because with the amount you can customize Concur and the way you can set up, your account segments on different fields, like your expense type or department or project, there's no guarantee that one client will have the same setup as the next client that you move to. So for specific templates, we don't have them due to the fact that this data file can change around. And the data we receive can be different based on how they've customized their system. The good news is that we always know it's going to come in some form of, it's going to come in the same format. So So it's just identifying the needed columns and then mapping those within SmartConnect. So I'm not going to save any of my changes on here. I'm going to leave it as is. I've got this set up so that internally when it pulls down our file, it goes into a folder data source that we have, and then this runs on a schedule to integrate that data at the end of the day. Now I've taken out the automated piece of this because I actually want to run it manually to show you guys what it's going to look like as that data is flowing through. So for my data source, I went ahead and I've moved this to my demo image, and I'm pointing at a demo GP so my controller doesn't get mad at me. I've changed around a few of the names as well, so nobody can actually track what we're doing. But I'm looking for a specific template file that I've got named. And the reason I'm doing this is because then I don't care what the file name is that the extract comes to me as. It could be the June export, it could be July, it could be whatever month it happens to be. I don't have to rename that file at all after I've pulled it down from their web service or from their FTP site. Also, when it completes, SmartConnect is automatically going to move that file to a success or failure folder based on whether that data ran through correctly or not. On the destination side, this is where we're going to be sending the data to. So if we're working with Dynamics GP, we're running through the eConnect nodes that exist. Those are just a set of stored procedures. So if you're familiar with GP and with and if you've used SmartConnect before, you know what I'm talking about with the different eConnect nodes. We don't have to do anything extra in SmartConnect to get these to show up. We're just able to map the needed fields to each. So to create a journal entry, we're creating both the header and then the distribution based off of this. And if I open it up, you can see I've built in a few extra columns on here. So a few of these, like the transaction date and the transaction type, I've either got set to a hard-coded value for transaction type, dates coming directly from my Concur file that I've received. For the reference, I'm going to be hard-coding this to Concur export data, and the batch that we're going to be looking for is just going to be called eOne Concur when we go into GP and see that this is ran through. So the journal entry number, I don't have one that I want to use in the file, so I'm going to create a new journal entry number based on the data coming in, and it's just going to grab that from the GP setup as it creates it. When I look at the distribution portion of it and look at all the line items coming in, I've had to create a couple calculated fields for this data. If you remember when I had that extract information opened up, we had one column for the debit and credit, and then we had a column next to it flagging whether the amount was the actual debit or was the credit. I based those calculated fields off that information. So if I open up one of those, we can see that I'm looking at the column name journal debit or credit. I'm checking if that's a DR for debit. If it is, I'm returning the amount for the debit side of the journal entry. If it's not, I'm returning 0. And I do the opposite of that for the credit portion of it. I've also went ahead and created a calculated field to pull my account number in. As I was going through the file, I mentioned we've got multiple segments and they weren't all in one column in the file. I went ahead and concatenated those columns together to make sure that we can go ahead and get the account all in one field. So with that, I've got the map set up, and ideally this map would be set up and working before I got my file, so I wouldn't have to open this up and review it. This would just be running on a scheduled process. But instead, I'm going to run it by hand here so we can see the record, the file get picked up, and the record try to process. Now for this first example, I've actually got this set to fail. So I should get a failure. If I don't get a failure, I actually failed at my demo, which wouldn't be good. We'll see if we encounter an issue on here. So in this case, we've got a failure, we've got an error message, and if we're assuming that this is going to be scheduled rather than running it manually, I'm actually going to be waiting for an alert to be received from SmartConnect. So I've set this up as a schedule. I'm expecting an alert if something fails. My alert is going to look something like this. So because I got that failure, I get an email to myself or anyone else that needs to know about it, tell me what went wrong. So I've got my journal entry integration running. Tells me what my run number was. All of that data was being attempted to be sent in as one transaction. So that ran through and that also happened to fail. And then it also tells me my full error message on this email and even attaches a copy of the failed data that we tried to send through. So on here, I can see that this is complaining about an account number. So I'm looking at this account number and I know right away that this first segment is based off the department field in Concur. That's how we set it up. And the 900 department must not exist yet inside of my GP system. So I'm thinking somebody keyed something in wrong on the Concur side. and now I need to go fix it. So I've got a couple options. One, we could go back to the original source data, the data that was extracted from Concur, modify that and bring it in. I also happen to track this data that failed in SmartConnect. So my other option is to go directly into SmartConnect, take a look at the process errors screen, and then look at my run number 12. I can go ahead and open this up, and I can review the data that was attempted to be sent through. Now I know that department 900 is incorrect, and I conveniently did not put that at the top of my list here. Let's see if I can go find it. Oh, I actually might have messed this up in a different manner. Let's go ahead and see if I can fix this in one attempt. I'm actually not seeing the 900 in here. I may have broken this in a different manner. So if I was confident in my ability to fix this, which I'm not at the moment, let me make that clear. When I think it's fixed, I can go ahead and hit run all, and it's going to rerun that same process, but it's going to run it with this updated data on here. Now, if this completes, what it will do is it will pass through the data as expected on this next run. If it fails again, I'm going to end up with another failure in there. So in my case, it happened to run through. That was the error that was occurring. Record count 1, success count 1. I have a message on here saying it couldn't copy a file because that file no longer existed in the source folder. It had already been moved out, which is why I received that second message. But if I go to GP and take a look at my transactions on here, my financials batches, I should now have an eOne Concur batch with that one transaction that came through on it. We got our transactions, and we're going to go ahead and be able to open that up. And we've got all of our data in here. So the account numbers are demo accounts, so it's not actually the correct account, but any of the descriptions on that data would be correct that are running in. Now I know I'm running short on time, but I wanted to talk about just a couple things related to NAV or related to Business Central. So if I look at my map list again, I've also got integration set up to run to the payables invoice or the purchasing invoice inside of NAV. The destination for NAV or the destination for Business Central is based off the web services that exist within NAV and Business Central. So if you're not familiar with that, we've got a couple different articles on how to publish those and make those accessible. But the short story of it is any page or any window that you can access within NAV and within Business Central, you're able to publish that web service that sits behind it, and then we can integrate to it. So we can go ahead and create the needed journal entries. We can create the needed purchasing invoices off of here. We could create vendors if we needed to. The mapping within SmartConnect, once those pages are published, looks identical to any other destination. So if I open up the purchase invoice line, you can see once again, the layout of our windows haven't changed. It's just got the different fields or different attributes that we can map to based on it being a different destination and based on it having it be based on what web service you happen to have open and are mapping to. So if we run this through, this should run much more successfully than the journal entry. It should succeed on the first time. And something happened to my Dynamics NAV system, so it's not pulled open at the moment. Let me see if I can fire that up within this last minute that I have here. So as that runs into NAV, that's going to create a needed purchase invoice. The file layout for that was slightly different as it was based on Concur invoice. So we've got our vendor number and our vendor name and remit to address code, et cetera, in that extract file that allows us to have all the information we need when creating those purchasing invoices. If I switch to into NAV real quick, and I apologize that I'm skipping through this fairly quickly. I just want to make sure we stay within our timeline we need. Everything from this line and down, these came in through our extract file. And to prove that, if we wanted to look at it, I should be able to look at my success folder for this extract that happened to go into Dynamics NAV. We should see Coolwood, Top Bureau, etc. as our vendor names. And if we scrolled through this file, we'd have the correct amounts match up with the purchase invoices that were created. So, yeah, that's wrapping up my demo quick. Again, I apologize. We tried to keep it to 45 minutes here. We've got a section for Q&A at the end for us. So at this time, I'd like to open up. I know we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A section. I'm also seeing a couple messages being chatted in directly. So Drew, Bria, Alicia, if you guys have anything that's came into you, feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up as well. I know we've got one in here right off the bat from George, talking about supporting the NAV or Business Central account dimension values on the journals. So with NAV and Business Central specifically, they've got shortcut dimension values that they have available inside of the web service. I believe they have 8 of them available on this transaction type. I would have to double check that for you, but off the top of my head, that's what I remember being available within the web service that you can publish for journal entries within Dynamics NAV. All right, we've got a question on the standard file being a 256 pipe delimited file, and the one I showed being a CSV from Kitty. The file that I showed, the first one that I went through, there was actually no modifications done to it by our company. I pulled that directly off our Concur site just this morning and set it up to match this demo GP system. So the extract that I was grabbing was from the Concur expense, and it was in the payment manager window. When you close out that batch, there's the option to download that file directly from there, and that's what we went ahead and pulled down. I know there's a few different files that you can download from Concur, and I believe they've got a few different options on what they allow you to do in terms of customization and different packs that you can buy. I may let Drew or Bria answer that if they had any additional info besides what I've stated on there.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a number of different options there, and a number of different ways to configure it, and depending on, we have a standard and professional platforms, and there's some different differentiations between how the exports look and how they can configure. But on a specific, deal-to-deal specific basis, we can definitely get into more of that and know what that would look like.
Awesome. Got a few more questions rolling in here. A quick one from Amy is, will this webinar be forwarded to us after it's completed? Yes, it will be. We'll go ahead and send through the recording of the webinar. We'll send the PowerPoint slide deck as well through. Any other resources that we will pull together, we'll send it all through in one email to everyone. Also, another question from Amy was, do the credit card charges come into NAV as payables, invoices, or journal entries? Now, that is actually up to you. It's up to you and up to the customer. We don't have a strict, if you use Concur expense, it has to be a journal entry, or if it's a Concur invoice, it has to be a payables entry. You're able to go ahead and configure that within the mapping. So you can, as long as that data is as long as you can get the data out of Concur, you can then go ahead and map or integrate that to any module that you want within your financial system. There's a question in here that I don't actually know the answer to off the top of my head, so I'm going to read it out loud. I won't be able to answer it right now. I'll do a follow-up on it to make sure it does get answered, though. There's a question around jobs inside of NAV or Business Central, and if we can pull jobs in Concur and attach, I'm assuming experience to jobs, and send to Concur or send back to Business Central or NAV. I haven't done that before, so I'm a little unfamiliar with the question. I'll probably follow up with you directly if that's all right. I'm gonna get some more information after the call here, as I know we're approaching the end of our hour that we had blocked off. All right, a couple more minutes to get any last questions in. There is a question from Kyle on if the FTP option from Concur is an extra cost on that. Drew or Bria, do you guys want to take that?
Yes, there is a small setup cost. Typically, it's around $500. It may be a little less than that to get that initially set up, but there's no recurring cost associated with that.
All right, everyone. Here's Drew's contact info and mine as well. If you guys have any other extra questions, or if you want to discuss anything further, we'd both be happy to talk to you guys about either either side of this, anything related to Concur or anything related to integration, just go ahead and pass it through to either one of us, and we'll be able to help you out. I want to thank the Concur team and Drew and Bria for hopping on this presentation and providing their time to go through and present with us on this joint session. And I want to thank all of you guys for taking time out of your morning and joining up as well. So I hope everyone has a great day here. Thank you, guys.